Tatiana Baps. I go by Tata.
And I am Mamie Melons.
And we want to welcome you to the new Booby Trap podcast, Wine, Films, Murder.
Trap. Big, beautiful booby trap.
So with this podcast, we delve into the world of classic crime and murder films, paired with the perfect wine.
So we're just two friends that like discussing murder, watching classic films, and drinking wine together. We thought it would be fun to mix these topics together in a podcast and hope others might also enjoy.
So first, I want to bring up the term booby trap. Did you know that the term booby trap comes from the seabird called a booby? So the most well-known is a blue-footed booby. So the name booby comes from the Spanish word bobo, which means stupid, foolish, or clown. So because the booby is, like other seabirds, very clumsy on land, they're also regarded as foolish for their apparent fearlessness of humans. So boobies were easily caught and eaten by shipwrecked sailors. These hungry sailors would set a trap for the docile seabird. So booby trap was literally a trap for a booby.
The term booby trap now is defined as a harmful device designed to be triggered by its unsuspecting victim. And for us, an unsuspecting victim of crime and the legal system.
Mm-hmm. So our first episode of the Booby Trap podcast, we're delving into the iconic courtroom drama, Anatomy of a Murder. And we're pairing it with deep layered flavors of Cabernet Sauvignon that mirrors the film's intricate plot and complex characters. And just as the wine reveals new notes with each sip, the film unveils new twists and turns with each scene. And to mark this special occasion, our first episode of the Booby Trap podcast, we're pairing a 2020 Francis Ford Coppola director's cut, Cabernet Sauvignon, with the classic film Anatomy of a Murder, which is creating a rich and immersive experience blending the art of winemaking with the art of cinema. And the robust body of the Cabernet Sauvignon complements the film's rich storytelling and dramatic courtroom scenes. Both the wine and the film offer a full-bodied experience that engages the senses. So let's give you a little bit of background about this film. So Anatomy of a Murder was directed by Otto Preminger and released in 1959. The main cast includes James Stewart, Lee Remick, and Ben Gazzara.
Well, what's interesting about this film is that the story is based on a real-life court case from 1952. The case took place in a small town of Big Bay in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and involved a man named Coleman Peterson, who was the first lieutenant in the United States Army. Peterson shot a tavern owner named Mike Chenoweth after Peterson's wife accused Chenoweth of rape. The defense attorney for this case was John D. Volker, who later became a Michigan Supreme Court justice. Now, Volker wrote the novel Anatomy of a Murder under the pen name Robert Traver, based on this case. In the trial, Volker evoked the defense of irresistible impulse, which is a version of a rarely used temporary insanity defense. After a spirited trial and 2 hours of deliberation, the jury of 11 men and 1 woman returned a verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity.
So let's talk about some of the characters. So this was quite the courtroom drama. We had major actors in this film, including Jimmy Stewart, who plays Paul Bilgler, the attorney who's defending a man accused of murder. And Jimmy Stewart's been in like After the Thin Man, Shop Around the Corner, Philadelphia Story, others that I'm sure you've seen like Rear Window, etc. So many to discuss, right?
Yeah, a lot. Mm-hmm. So then you have Ben Gazzara. Now he stars as Lieutenant Frederick Mannion, the defendant who is the man accused of the murder. Now you'll remember him from more recent films, which is The Big Lebowski by the Coen brothers, and as the supervillain in Roadhouse opposite Patrick Swayze. Some other notable pictures, but obviously more recognizable in those two. And then we have Lee Remick. And again, you might remember her from something more recent, which is The Omen. And she stars as Laura Mannion, the wife of the accused murderer, and the woman who accused the murdered man of raping her. Then we have the big guy, George C. Scott, as Claude Dancer, who supports the prosecution. Now, we all know that we have Dr. Strangelove. Again, a more recent film, you'll have Firestarter, his Academy Award-winning performance and Patton. And again, way too many pictures to name, because as we know, he was a prolific actor for many, many years.
Absolutely. We also have Eve Arden. She stars as Maida Rutledge, so Mr. Beagler's legal secretary. She's been in movies such as Our Miss Brooks, but more recently you probably have seen her in Grease. I believe she plays the principal within that film.
Yes.
We also have Arthur O'Connell. He stars as Farnell McCarthy, and essentially, my understanding, he was the kind of the alcoholic legal partner, but I'm not exactly positive on that. It's a little confusing.
Yeah.
But you've seen him if you've watched some older films, and like Bus Stop with Marilyn Monroe, Picnic with William Holden, Operation Petticoat, which is my favorite because it has Cary Grant in it, of course, which we both love. Also, last but not least, Duke Ellington. So he actually had a cameo as Pie Eye, so a bar piano player. But also, he created the jazz score for the film. So, like I said, an amazing group of people that are playing not only as actors and actresses, but also the music itself.
Right. Well, so we wanted to share just a few pieces of trivia related to the film. And one, did you know that the film was controversial for its explicit handling of sexual passions and the crime of rape? Right? The film contained words never heard in American films, with the Motion Picture Production Code, which it was known as the Hays Code. And such controversial terms used included contraceptive, sexual and climax, not my personal favorite, but bitch, panties, penetration, rape, slut, sperm, spermatogenesis, and other terms related to the legal technicalities of rape.
And the film was so controversial at the time that, so Jimmy Stewart's father, so the main actor, was so offended by the film that he deemed it a dirty picture, and he actually took out an ad in his local newspaper telling people not to see it. The film was also banned initially in Chicago, Illinois upon its release, stating that the film was immoral and obscene. Eventually, a federal judge overturned the ban because although some of the words and phrases used were stronger than what audiences were used to, the court decided that the terms weren't being used offensively, and you would actually hear such terms in a courtroom setting, which would be, similar to, what you would see in the real world. So, something that you would hear within, regular communities around the country.
Right. And also, did you know that filming was done entirely in Michigan? And that the interior of Barney Quill's bar in the movie is not a movie set, but the actual interior of the Thunder Bay Inn Tavern in Big Bay, Michigan, located in Upper Michigan, also known as the UP and Yoop. Go Yoopers.
Yep.
It's a gorgeous area, which we can attest to, right?
Absolutely.
Where Yoopers live. It is approximately 325 yards down the road from the Lumberjack Tavern, where the actual murder on which the novel and film are based took place in 1952.
Yeah, we hadn't watched the film prior to our road trip, so maybe if we had, we would have stopped and checked that out.
Yeah,
but that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Maybe next time.
We would have definitely have added that to the adventure.
Absolutely. So we aren't lawyers, but both of us have worked in the legal field at one point or another in our careers, and we both highlighted some frustrating and even very inappropriate activities that were happening as part of the legal process that was being depicted in the film. And there were a total of 4 major areas of interest that we wanted to briefly discuss. And this includes the rape allegation, the legal discovery procedure, irresistible impulsivity, and witness coaching.
That's a whole lot of word there.
Indeed.
Right? The first area of interest was obviously, and the big one, is the rape allegation itself. Mm-hmm. So the film Anatomy of a Murder was controversial for its explicit handling of sexual passions and the crime of rape, as we previously mentioned. However, during the trial, it took a while for the topic of rape to be focused on. In the film, the prosecution's reluctance to discuss the alleged rape of Laura Mannion, which played by Lee Remick, is a significant plot point. This hesitation adds to the complicity of the case and highlights the challenges faced by the defense attorney, Paul Bigler, played by James Stewart, in proving the client's motive for the murder. The prosecution tries at every instance to block any mention of Mannion's motive for killing Quill. Bigler works diligently to bring the topic into the courtroom, arguing that it is essential to understanding the motive behind the murder. Eventually, he manages to get the rape of Laura Mannion into the record, and Judge Weaver agrees to allow the matter to be part of the deliberations. When Bigler finally manages to get the rape allegation into the record, it significantly impacts the jury's perception of the case. The inclusion of this information allows the jury to consider the emotional and psychological state of Lieutenant Frederick Mannion, played by Ben Gazzara, at the time of the murder, which is central to his defense of the temporary insanity. The jury's deliberations become more complex as they weigh the credibility of Laura Mannion, played by Lee Remick, testimony, and the implications of the alleged assault. This development adds depth to the courtroom drama and highlights the challenges of achieving justice in such cases. During cross-examination, Dancer insinuates that Laura openly flirted with other men, including the man she claimed raped her, except in the courtroom, Laura dresses provocatively and is flirty with men, despite her husband in jail. Psychiatrists give conflicting testimony to Mannion's state of mind at the time that he killed Quill. Dancer says that Mannion may have suspected Laura of cheating on him because he asked her, a Catholic, to swear on a rosary that Quill raped her. This raises doubt as to whether the act was consensual. So I guess we're victim shaming here, right? Mm-hmm. Or victim blaming. The film delves into the intricacies of legal strategy and the moral ambiguities involved in such cases. It also reflects the social attitudes at the time towards discussing sensitive topics like sexual assault in a public forum.
And I think this is probably the biggest area that, one of the biggest areas that we were truly upset about, right? It's just
as a woman, I take it personally.
They would not talk about the rape in any context, and you're just kind of but that's the whole point of this. And I think, right, as being a woman, you're just how can you just totally ignore that piece of it?
And I think it also shifts that now the trial becomes about her. She's not on trial.
Yeah.
She's not the defendant, but somehow or another she becomes the defendant, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. So the second area of interest that I guess we kind of saw as being inappropriate was the depiction of the legal discovery procedure. So during a criminal case, prosecutors must provide the defendant copies of materials and evidence that the prosecution intends to use at trial. And this process is called discovery and continues from the time the case begins to the time of trial, and the prosecutor, I'm having a hard time saying that word,
Yeah, well.
has a continuing obligation to provide the defendant documents and other information which may reflect upon the case, and a failure of the prosecutor to do so can expose the prosecutor to fines, sanctions by the court. Further, the prosecutor is required to provide the defense with evidence that may hurt their case. So this is called, actually I might need help on this one.
This is harder than prosecutor, I'll tell you. Exculpatory.
There you go.
Well,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this evidence could show that the defendant's actually innocent, and if the prosecution doesn't provide it to the defense, it actually may require a new trial. So throughout the film, it was clear that the discovery process wasn't being followed. One of the examples of this actually was the witness list. One of the and essentially introducing new witnesses without the other party being aware of this new witness. A perfect example was when the defense brought in Mary Pylant to the witness stand without previous knowledge from the prosecution, and additionally, she came to the court with new evidence, like a pair of women's panties, stating she found them in the laundry room. And it was at this point that's now Exhibit 1 for the defense that's being submitted into the court at that moment. However, we don't see this, this isn't determined that the legal procedure, wasn't, it's not being followed properly, but obviously they're doing it for the drama.
Yeah, it's not a documentary.
It's not.
Yeah,
no.
because
otherwise it's boring.
I don't want to watch this movie, that part of the movie, a second time because it's a mistrial. Yeah.
And discovery is not a very interesting area. It really isn't. If you think about I used to work in a law firm. I've gone through thousands of documents just for one single case. And adding Bates labels to each of those, documents.
Yeah.
It's also a little bit of a game too, right? Like, you don't want to just show, here's all the information that's going to be helpful for the case.
Right.
They're going to try to hide things. Hide it in the sense of, it's only two pages of a document that you really most key. But let me give you 500 boxes of other documents.
Yeah. And the movie's defense too. This is the one point where I get very caught up on.
Yeah.
But it is 1952. It's not, at that period in time, we're all familiar because it's the age of information of the whole rules of evidence, discovery, all this type of thing. But in 1952, people were a lot less curious, right? They go to the movie to immerse themselves in the experience. We're more critical. We turn a more critical eye to movies now, I think.
Yeah.
But so whether or not in 1952 they were walking out and going, "Well, that was a crock a crock." I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know. But doubtful.
Very doubtful.
1952. They got a lot more better things to do than
Well, you probably also had less people working in the law field too, I would assume.
I would assume, yeah, and so so now, but in hindsight, it's like that. But again, if you want to see a documentary, you go see a documentary. You want to see a fictional film, this is what you go do. You want the gotchas and you want a little bit of a mess.
Yeah.
So leads us into the third area of interest, which was the topic of irresistible impulse, which I'm assuming is what's called a crime of passion now. I'm assuming they're interchangeable. Which is a type of insanity, temporary insanity defense. The defendant argued that they should not be held criminally liable for their actions that broke the law because they could not control those actions even if they knew them to be wrong. So the irresistible impulse test is a component of many tests for the insanity defense. Under this rule, the defendant cannot be found guilty if they prove that as a result of mental illness, they were unable to control their impulses at the time of the crime, even if they knew that committing that crime was illegal or morally wrong. This test emerged as a response to criticisms directed at the McNaughton rule. Unlike the McNaughton rule, the irresistible impulse test goes beyond looking at a defendant's awareness of right and wrong, but it also evaluates the capacity to resist impulses to unlawful acts. The irresistible impulse test dates back to the 19th century, even before my time. It was first applied by the Alabama Supreme Court in the landmark case of Parsons v. State. And this decision, um, the court introduced a new perspective on criminal responsibility. The court held that due to the overpowering influence of a mental defect, a defendant could be competent enough to discern right from wrong and still be exempt from culpability. At the time of the alleged crime, the defendant's free agency had been obliterated by the profound impact of a disease of the mind. The court linked the criminal act and the mental disorder. This established a cause and effect relationship where the mental disease was the cause of the offense. It also recognized that the influence mental disorders exerted over a defendant's decision-making process. Ultimately, the court's decision in Parsons v. State set a precedent that, in some cases, the defendant could not be found guilty by reason of could be found not guilty by reason of insanity. This marked a significant departure from traditional assessments of criminal responsibility, and it also paved the way for a more nuanced understanding of mental illness, free will, and culpability in criminal cases. In jurisdictions where it's recognized as an affirmative defense, meaning that, it shifts the burden of proof to the defendant rather than the prosecution, are generally required to demonstrate two key elements. One is going to be the existence of mental illness. The first element involves proving the presence of mental illness. The second being causation of inability to control actions. The second element involves establishing a causal link. This link, the diagnosed mental illness, and the defendant's incapacity to control their actions. This requires a proof to show how mental illness directly contributes to the inability to exercise control. Now, proving that a defendant lacked control over their actions poses a formidable challenge.
Absolutely.
It's in present day, it's rarely successful.
Yeah.
Because I think it goes without saying, when you kill somebody, you're probably a little kind of touched in the head anyway, right? But the process can include medical evaluation, expert opinions from specialists in mental health. The evidence presented must affirm the existence of a diagnosed mental condition. It must also show a specific impact on the defendant's behavior. The evidence should note the environmental factors that may have triggered the condition. The irresistible impulse test was an important corrective to McNaughton cognitive bias. However, it still came under some criticism of its own. For example, some argued it made it easier to fake insanity. I don't doubt that.
Absolutely.
A recent use of the irresistible impulse argument was in 1994 when, and I know our listeners will know this one, Lorena Bobbitt, who had cut off her husband's penis, was acquitted of assault by reason of insanity. Right? It was what made it such a, besides the penis, made it such a big case. But so it's a hard one to prove. But so having James Stewart as your attorney would sure help, right?
Absolutely. So the fourth area of interest is witness coaching. And so a controversial legal issue in this film is related to possible witness coaching, which is a violation of legal canons. The only plausible legal defense Lieutenant Manning has is the insanity defense, which is virtually spelled out to a befuddled Mannion by his prospective counsel. So Mr. Bugler, who essentially he kind of temporarily suspends the conversation that they're having and suggests to Mannion to rethink his factual / legal position, and it suggests that the defendant may be concealing the truth and manipulating his story in order to obtain the best possible verdict. And so by witness coaching by the prosecution, it's even more blatant as they call in other jail inmates awaiting sentencing to testify against Mannion. And this is portrayed to an extent as subordination of perjury. Did I say it right?
Probably I think not. So.
Okay.
Now can you explain to me what it means?
So it's a crime of persuading or permitting a person to commit perjury, which is the swearing of a false oath to tell the truth in a legal proceeding. And this suggests that the prosecution dangled the possibility of like a lighter sentence through plea bargain as an incentive to perjury.
Yeah, and and we all know that those are completely unreliable witnesses, and the defense would tear them apart in present day of, if you offer something in exchange and that's their motivation. So they immediately, besides the fact they're criminals, are immediately not a reliable witness anymore. Easy to disprove that one.
Well, it is interesting because I think nowadays, like when you hear about people going onto the stand, even if they're there as a witness of some kind, there is coaching, I guess, in a sense, but maybe not quite the same type of coaching, right? Like it's more of just ensuring that the person doesn't change their story, their facts. So there's coaching in the sense of just making sure that you're like testing them, like it's like doing a presentation, right? You perform that multiple times to make sure that you aren't changing things here and there every time you provide that presentation. Exactly. So different coaching, but at the same time, maybe a hint of it, right?
Well, yeah.
Definitely not as blatant as what these.
Where's the fine line between that and getting disbarred?
Exactly.
Or getting sanctioned by the court, or having the testimony thrown out.
Sure.
So, like I say, where is that line?
Yeah.
So, now we know he, as we said in the beginning, he was found not guilty. But as the jury deliberates, Bigler, McCarthy, and Rutledge wait around in their office. Rutledge, now remember, she's the Eve Arden character.
Yep.
I believe the secretary, right?
Yes.
The smarty pants.
Yep.
Secretary. Okay. I remember it right. Wants to be told that they will win the case. She is counting on the promissory note from Lieutenant Mannion to borrow money on, as it hopes to buy a new office typewriter as the P&F don't strike Artie of the first art rather than party of the first part. Okay. Artie of the first part. I can just imagine,
oh my gosh, into those legal documents, at the court.
Oh my God, can you imagine? Yeah. Well, I'm kind of hung up on the typewriter. A what?
Well, yeah, to be typing, typewriter. Oh,
yeah.
Gosh, just all the extra work to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So McCarthy, who's Arthur O'Connell, he contemplates 12 people go off into a room, 12 different minds, 12 different hearts, and 12 different walks of life, 12 sets of eyes, ears, shapes, and sizes, and these 12 people are asked to judge another human being as different from them as they are from each other. And when they judge him, they must be one mind, unanimous. That's one of the miracles of man's disorganized soul, that they can do it. And in most instances, they will do it well. God bless juries.
So the jury finds the defendant, Lieutenant Mannion, as being not guilty by reason of insanity. When heading over to the client to get the client's signature on the promissory note, lawyer's getting paid by a promissory note. Wow. Okay.
Get that typewriter.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, you got to keep your secretary happy.
Yeah, you do. You do. Bigler and McCarthy find Lieutenant and Mrs. Mannion have left the area. In the note that this left for Bigler, the Lieutenant Mannion apologized for leaving so suddenly, but he was seized by an irresistible impulse. What a nice neat little bow, right?
Yeah, no, I love that.
Yeah, that was not I guess, but it was. So I think we talked about this when we saw the movie, is that you and I spent a lot of time during that movie waiting for that. Like, was there a red herring? Was there a surprise twist? And there were some,
it made you,
twists and turns.
You made you wonder a lot of things, right? You're like, ooh, was she cheating? Was it like a rape? Like, yeah, I mean, just she was very flirty on lots of different occasions, and you're just like, you got to wonder, right?
Yeah.
What's the scenario here?
But flirty doesn't mean yes.
It doesn't,
right?
no.
And so there was a lot, I think there was some purposeful that it was to leave you thinking and making some of your own conclusions. But I'm not going to lie, I was waiting for that, like, you've seen those movies where it's like you find out, like Ed Norton in Primal Fear or something like that the whole time they've been guilty and they've been fooling their attorney. Mm-hmm. And I kept waiting for that to happen. Yeah. And it was like, no, it's just, she's not getting her typewriter, I don't think. She's going to have to still doing what? Artie of the Earth's part. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it was one of those things, too, like, right, I think for her, it caused the most complexity or, like, kind of confusion as to how this was going to end. Because it seemed like she wanted her husband to go to jail, but maybe not. And, like, it was just very confusing as it continued. And you're, like, kind of going, ooh, this is going to be the thing that turns it into a different approach, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is now the new information that comes in front of them. And, yeah, he's guilty, she's guilty. Or what they're saying is totally off the wall, or,
Well, she's an imperfect person. I mean, she's trying to get the James Stewart, the Bigler, to the lawyer, the defending attorney, to sleep with her.
Yeah.
Why? Who knows? Just because she's just a very flawed human being. But I think the reason that I personally expected all that, and I think we're doing one of, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in the series, we're going to do an Agatha Christie movie.
I believe so.
And Agatha Christie, of course, wrote most of her things with the aha.
Yeah.
And I'm always looking for the aha.
Right.
And I got to lower my expectations that, like, I think
it was still exhilarating, right? Because you didn't know when it was going to happen. And I think it was more maybe feeling a little, like, let down towards the end.
But it held me to the end.
But to the very end, right? It was still kind of what's going to happen.
Oh, right? Yeah. And it held me to the end.
Yeah.
And then it makes it a little easier to be critical of the rules of evidence and some of the legal procedures. And you're like, that would never happen. But you're just like, okay, that's the aside. And I don't think the director, that's really where they were going with this. And I think it's what Otto Preminger did this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he wanted you to think and not get caught up in what the legal procedures were. So it held me to the end. But, when I got to the credits, I'm like, remember the look on my face? I was like, what? No, gotchas? Where's the gotchas? But I think the note was kind of the gotcha.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I will say, for me, it kind of wrapped it up a bit. Like, it, not in the sense of, like, that physical wrapping it up. Like, they've now run off, and it's like, they're never going to get paid, all of that sort of stuff. But I think just the note itself was just a very cutesy, like, way to end that.
It was. And bring it all
I enjoyed
back.
that part, I guess.
Yeah, and bring it all back. And when he says irresistible impulse, then maybe you're supposed to think is like, was that all just... And remember, the irresistible, that was the attorney's idea to do that. He had to pretty much, as we mentioned, coach him into saying
Absolutely.
that. So it's like, I guess he's like, I did it because, ha-ha, wink, wink, of, you told me. You're not getting paid because of the reason you gave me, which is kind of, maybe it's a little twist, and I didn't catch it at the time, but just as we're talking it through now, that maybe that was the twist. And I got you at the attorney. It's like, thanks for everything.
I guess so. Yeah.
And thanks for giving me a defense on not paying you. So.
Well, you know what? That is all for today's episode. This was super fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Next time, we're going to explore another classic crime film with its perfect wine pairing.
Cheers.
So, cheers.
Cheers, clink. Yes.